Welcome to this module on how we make decisions. And the aim of this module is to build your understanding and self-awareness around what mental processes are going on when we're making any type of decision. And how we make decisions is widely debated, but this paper does a really great job at integrating much of the research to expand our understanding. And the most coherent theory of how we make decisions is what's known as the dual process theory. And if we use this theory as a framework, it can really help us make sense of the different types of decisions we're facing in sport. Our decision making begins with us being in some sort of situation where we need to make a decision. The situation could be deciding whether a player who's developed a tightness in a muscle continues with a training session. It could be deciding if an athlete should do top-up conditioning at the end of a session, or it could be decisions around planning a pre-season, for example. Now, if we've encountered this situation before, or we recognize features of this situation as being similar to previous experiences we've had, or perhaps we need to make the decision really quickly, it'll trigger system 1, our intuitive response, which tells us what decision we should make. If we don't recognize the situation, system 2 will engage, and a more deliberate analysis of the decision will occur, as long as we've got sufficient time to undertake this analytical process. Perhaps if we're unfamiliar with the situation, or maybe we do recognize the situation, but there's some surprising or confusing information that we're struggling to understand, system 2 is going to start to analytically reason through this information. The reality is most of the time we're continually flipping between our system 1 and our system 2 when we're making decisions. For example, if we're doing some deep system 2 thinking, we might end up recognizing something that we've encountered before, and then system 1 kicks in and it jumps to a decision. It's important to recognize that whether we use our fast system 1 or our slow system 2 isn't only dependent on the time available to make the decision or whether we're familiar with the situation. Obviously, there's other things that are coming into play. For example, if the situation is high stakes, our tendency is to want to trust our gut feel or use our system 1 to make the decision. But this isn't usually a very effective strategy. In high stakes decisions, we want to do everything that we can to use our system 2 to make the decision. If we're overloaded with too much information, we might think this would be a good idea because we'd be using our analytical system 2 to make a decision, but the opposite usually happens. If we're overloaded, or perhaps we're overloading somebody else with too much information, it becomes really resource intensive for our brains to compute all of this data, and we end up just switching to using our gut feel, using our system 1 as a coping strategy, which is a bad idea. So we need to be aware of this when we're giving, other practitioners, particularly coaches, lots of data to make a decision. Similarly, if somebody has to make a lot of high stakes decisions in a short period of time, decisions that typically we would want to use data for so that we can make a well-reasoned system 2 decision, it's likely that as a coping mechanism, we're just going to switch over to system 1 and go with our gut, which again isn't what we want, but it's something that we need to be aware of. So, what can we do to improve our situational awareness around our decision making? To begin with, we should start by explicitly recognizing our decision-making situation. So we should be asking ourselves, in this situation, do I need to make the decision immediately, or have I got sufficient time to undertake a more analytical approach? Next, is the decision a simple decision where there's recognized and agreed best practice and there's multiple layers of evidence, it's research what the best thing to do is? Or is this decision more complex? Perhaps it's a one-of-a-kind type of problem where experts might disagree on what the best course of action is and where it's difficult to predict the outcome of the decision in advance. And finally, we should be asking, is this a decision where it's practical to draw on the knowledge and expertise of others, or am I isolated and must I make this decision on my own? And one of the very best tools you can use to improve your situational awareness and to make your decision making more systematic is a decision map. And I'd encourage you to create your own decision map for your role, or if you're the head of a department, for your team. On the left-hand side, on the y-axis, we have slow and fast decisions. And on the x-axis, we have the decision context, so whether it's simple or complex. And using the map can help develop your situational awareness by getting you to think in advance about some of the conditions surrounding your decisions. And then you can start developing appropriate strategies specific to the type of decisions you're facing. We know for our simple decisions, there's probably going to be some academic research, there'll be some best practice guidelines, or even rules and regulations which help us make a decision. For example, it's simple and obvious what we should be doing immediately post-surgery because there's research papers with multiple layers of evidence telling us the outcomes from different approaches. On the other hand, planning the training load between the first match and the second match in a World Cup is much more complex. There's so many factors impacting the outcome of this decision. We can't really rely on the same simple decision-making strategies that we would for a simple problem. So we need to use some more advanced strategies, and we'll cover some of these later in this course. In this module, I've introduced the dual systems theory behind how we make decisions. System 1, which makes quick, intuitive decisions without much conscious thought, and System 2, which makes more deliberate, analytical, and well-reasoned decisions. Next, to improve your decision-making, increase your situational awareness. How much time do you have to make a decision? Can you perhaps give yourself even more time to use your analytical system? Are the decisions that you're facing simple decisions where there's an obvious answer, or are these decisions more complex? And finally, start mapping your decisions. Visually displaying your decisions on a map will help you identify the best strategies for each type of decision, and I'll cover some of these strategies in later modules.